what we call mind, we were referring to are the words we hear inside our head, right? Our thoughts.
Yeah.
That's what we call mind. Because they're in words, we think it must be important. If it must be important and it's in words, we must listen. We assume that that little piece of brain tissue that generates those words actually knows something and knows what it's talking about. And we clearly are the problem because it's always telling us we are the problem and what we can do or we can't do or don't have enough time, etc. It is not, folks. It is a piece of brain tissue. It is neurons firing, making words. Who knows why it does what it does? Well, I'm not going to go to the neuroscience. I do know why.
Spoiler alert. We don't.
Right. But the fact that most of what gets generated in our thoughts is a consequence of conditioning that creates a huge amount of negativity. Now, remarkably, thoughts affect the body. And when the body responds, we have sensations, and in certain combinations, we call those feelings. So if we are thinking in negative, self-critical words, our body is going to have a negative emotional response, right? Or if we get into a negative mood, it goes the other way. It's a two-way street, goes up from the body into the brain, and these associative thoughts that make sense with that mood, anxiety, for example, is a real good one.
Yeah.
The brain will start to, quote, worry. Now, here's what I want to say. First of all, you are not your thoughts.
Yeah.
Everybody says, I am. That is not us. We are this total, complete being, right? Our thoughts are not who we are. Heaven forbid if I thought my thoughts were me, I would think sometimes I'm a pretty terrible person because my mind will generate some really not so nice stuff.
Right.
And I look at it and I go, oh, that's not me. I never do that. I've never done that. I will never do that, So
It's just really interesting because you say it's a clump of cells whose function is to create words based on our experience.
Yep.
We don't pay attention to the clump of cells that makes our diaphragm go up and down, right? We don't pay attention to the clump of cells that makes our eyes blink or our muscles work.
or
right?
our heartbeat or our lungs breathe, and which to me I think are pretty important.
Those feel like big ones.
Those feel like big ones, but our attentional focus will lock into these words, and we will accept that nonsense as valid.
Right.
It isn't valid. So I'm just going to jump a little bit over to where the particular work I do with mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is using meditation and mindfulness to develop the ability to sit back and go, wow, that's really weird, but I'm not going to pay any attention to that because that's not helpful.
Right.
As Mark said, if we're talking about, you can stretch for 5 minutes a day and the mind goes, I don't have time for that. And the mouth goes,
I won't be doing that.
Yeah.
What?
Right. And the mouth says, I won't be doing that. As opposed to if we can just see that thought bubble rise and float away and go, yeah, I could carve out 5 minutes to do stretching.
Crazy roommate in my head. What are you talking about? I got plenty of time. There's Netflix and I just do all this stupid stuff. I'm on Reddit 3 hours a
He's
day.
on Reddit way too much.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. But put the phone down, go back
Put
to what
the
you said.
phone down.
Lo and behold, we can do this. So really one of the most important things, I can't emphasize this enough, is to stop listening to what the mind is chattering about. It will and does say anything.
Yeah.
And it is destructive. It is so incredibly destructive because the majority of what people have rise up in their minds is negative, judgmental, critical, and actually dangerous.
Yeah.
And I will give you the example. Sadly, people think I should kill myself.
Right.
And that can control their lives. And that's a horrible, horrible thing to even think about. Sorry to be so extreme, but I want to make the point.
I think that extremism is important for this.
How far and how bad
Because
it
your
can
brain, like your brain, everything about us is survival instinct, and then your brain is telling yourself, you know what, let's be done with this, which is contrary to its function, right?
Totally.
And that's how nutty that roommate is.
That's
right?
how insane thoughts can be, where they will be detrimental and dangerous and harmful to our day-to-day well-being, let alone out at that extreme.
Yeah.
If we're walking around consumed with anxiety, worried and fearful about all the bad things that can happen, we're in that state. And let's go back to what mental health versus what we're going to call mental illness is that if I am in this state of high anxiety, moment to moment, every day, there's a lot of interference in my life I can't cope very well, as opposed to if I'm just, let's say, normal nervous and calmer and I can work with that, it doesn't interfere in the same way.
One of the things I think is tough about the roommate is that I think the roommate is me, and
Right.
I trust me because I think I have great ideas, which is another part of my thinking, right? I think I'm awesome, and my ideas are sick every time. I got the best ideas ever. If I'm listening to that voice, but the voice is actually like a hobo who
Yeah.
lives on the street, who's like, bro, you should go do this.
Yeah.
If I thought of him that way, I'd be like, oh, well, that's a terrible piece of advice. I'm not
Yeah.
going to listen to that hobo on the street. He's got nothing to offer me. But that's not how I picture my roommate in my head. I picture him as a guy in a tuxedo,
Yeah.
fancy,
Ryan
who's got
Reynolds.
all the, just handsome
Yeah.
and smart,
Mhm.
the Steve Ferris style, just very handsome but lovely man. If I treat that voice as having that equal level of access to me, which it's not my voice that we've established isn't me. This voice, this roommate is not actually me. But when I equate him to me and I think of him in that same level and I give him that level of stature in my brain, now I'm going to start listening. And when I listen, I'm like, maybe I do want to be on Facebook for 17 hours today. Maybe I do want to just not do the things that I know that I should be doing for
Maybe
myself.
I do deserve that cheesecake.
Maybe that cheesecake is tasty, and this idea that I have dumping syndrome is going to not be a problem. The science behind it will go away, right? And it's very easy for me to do that. And we're taking the time to make this distinction because people don't talk about
this
your
was the
brain
key
this way.
for
This
me.
is important.
And this is, when I do my consultations with people and we touch on mental health before I recommend, I do an exercise with them that I think you taught me, which is this, with the hello exercise, right? So if I say to all of the listeners here, hello, there are two beings. There's me, my voice saying hello, and then your ears, your brain hearing me say hello and processing it. Now, say hello to yourself in your head. And in that moment, you'll realize that there is a voice in your head talking, and then there is a listening component of it. So right there is a proper demonstration of those clumps of cells. There's you, the person that's listening, and then there's the voice, the roommate. And so those two things, and that's what mindfulness does, and why we're having this conversation. We just need some distance on that because we could go Buddhist, we go Bob Thurman here, and say we're actually not the person listening either. We're the one observing the interactions, but that's for another conversation. But it's important that you know that there are the two components, and as long as you understand that they are two different beings, and you don't have to be the one guy with the voice. That's really critical.
And I've done some reading myself on this, so I'm like an Eckhart Tolle sort of approach to this, which is like he had this idea like maybe I should kill myself. And this idea that there's two separate beings. There's the one who's doing the thinking, which is I should kill myself. Those are two separate people. The I that's doing the thinking and the myself who's going to be killed. And so we're not making light of this, and I want to be really clear about this. Like this, we have lots of jokes on this show, and so that's
they're not funny.
This is not the funny aspect of the show. This is the serious part, which is what we're trying to do is make this distinction for folks who maybe haven't even considered that this is happening inside their brain. And so this may not be revelatory for some of you. For some of you, it might be the first time someone's talked to you about this, and so it might be weird and scary. That's great, because we don't want you to stay comfortable in this idea that your brain is you. And so we brought in a guy who's a heavy hitter in the field to talk to you about this, because we knew that if me and Neal started spouting about it and we let Ava come in and tell you about it, you weren't going to get the point of this. And so this is so crucial, and we're doing it so early in the podcast for this reason, because if we don't address mental health as part of this discussion, we're lost.
So one of the things I want to say is that this voice, this disparity that we're not connecting these dots on, then becomes a very big problem for us, right? And then we do a lot of stuff to quiet that voice, right? And that's where the problem lies, right? We don't understand that this is a phenomenon that's happening
To every human. This is not you.
human.
You're not super mentally ill because you have that voice. You're a person. You're a human.
We're not taught how to handle it. We try to logic our way out of it. I've noticed, in just like raising children, they try to like think their way through it. That's how I used to. If I just figure out the problem, I'll get out.
You cannot logic your way out of these problems.
And when it's quiet, when there are less people and distractions, the suffering, the voice becomes louder to people. And that's when the problem becomes a real issue, right?
Absolutely. And you can't think your way out of it. That's like trying to get out of a hole with a shovel. you're
Right.
just going to go deeper.
Right.
Deeper.
Right? Exactly.
Like you're
And-
using the broken thing to fix the problem, right?
Yeah.
So you're accessing this thing that's not working right to try to solve the problem.
It's not that we don't think about things, I mean, it makes sense to ponder problems and deal with things and so forth and so on, but to understand the mind is a tool and is not this thing that chatters. Very, very commonly, I will hear patients say to me, I am so hard on myself, which goes back to what you said, Mark, as if there are two of us. Mm-hmm. There's me and there's this thing in my head, this person in my head who seems to be really
He's a
smart and knows everybody and knows everything and is telling me what's wrong with me all the time. The only reason that the mind seems to know what's going on is because it now has information because something has happened that has provided more information. Said, when you made that decision when you were like 22, boy, what a dumb, jerky, stupid decision.
That was dumb.
Oh, yeah. So now, all these years later, you see all the outcome and you act like you knew what was going on at 22, but you didn't bother to tell me. And now I'm going to get on your case. There is no two of us. There is just one mind body going on. And so consequently, that if we can step back and we can just become aware of that flow and create some space, we will make much wiser, more skillful decisions than we do if we, as you said earlier, oh yeah, go ahead. That seems like a really good idea. And what is so weird, and you touched on this, Neal, is that the mind will put information out there that is clearly not good for us. I will tell you, like 98% of the people who walk into my office say, I know what I should be doing. I know what I need to do.
We talk about that all the time.
Yep.
That's
I
right.
know how to eat. I know how to exercise. I know what I need to do.
So what therapy
what's
is
the
about
problem?
is how do you get
Why are
people
you here?
to do what they actually know, right? I know smoking's bad for you. I know going back to trying to quiet the mind in dysfunctional ways. I know I'm drinking too much. I know I shouldn't be smoking pot this much or whatever it is that people are doing to try to mood alter, quiet the chatter, get away from it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people will say, I know. So what therapy, in many respects, from my point of view, is about is helping people to get to do what they already know they need and should do. So there is that healthy core that needs to be supported and trained.